First, I'm Arun Vishwanath. I'm an empirical social scientist at SUNY Buffalo. I study the people problems of cybersecurity.
I'm Nate Cardozo. I'm a senior attorney at the Electronic Frontier Foundation in San Francisco. I was a web designer in a long past life, probably before some of you were born. And I study the legal problems of cybersecurity. I'm a lawyer, so that's the lens that I take to look at security and privacy.
My name's Mark Scott. I actually live here in town. Actually, we have work for a company called ForcePoint that does we do cybersecurity. We have a bunch of different products. The product I work on has to do with what we call cross-domain, managing access to different security levels and against different network security domains. So our customers are U.S. government, DoD, intelligence community, things like that. So work with all those kind of customers and deal with all the unique problems that we have in those domains.
Awesome. So I guess, my follow-up step would be then, where do you think the industry is right now as a whole? And then kind of, how do we get in terms of, scaling, the internet and so on? Especially because you guys have different perspectives on this because you come from different backgrounds. I think it'll be interesting to hear a little more about that.
Are we going the same route? Okay.
Sure.
It's fine. First, the question is, which industry are we talking about?
Security in general.
Security in general, right? I mean, so what's happening with security in general? I think there's a lot of things happening, right? It's all over the news. I don't think we've even scratched the tip of the problems in terms of solving it. There's a feeding frenzy right now of cybersecurity products and firms out there, and there is, I think, a push and pull towards, what we understand as security, what we understand as privacy, what are we willing to give up, what are people trying to get their hands on, who we trust. I mean, none of these questions have been answered. That's why I said we're barely scratching the tip of the problem, and I think we haven't even discussed the problem yet. We've been talking around it.
I think the concept of a security industry is a little bit ridiculous. We shouldn't have a security industry. We should have security. The products that use, the services that we use every day should be designed with security from the outset and with privacy from the outset. Of course, they weren't. The internet was designed as a plain text, unauthenticated network, essentially, and that's still what it is. You can bolt security onto a service like email. And then you're stuck with PGP, and look where that has us today. So the security industry is definitely still in its infancy. I would hope that it's also in its death throes, but I doubt it. I think we're going to have a long, long way to go before security is something that we don't have to think about. That's the goal, right? The goal is that we don't have to think about security. The goal is that I can go to a store, buy something like this, use it, put it in my pocket, never have to think about it again. That's not really true as of now. The companies like Apple and Facebook and Google are definitely thinking about security. They have huge security teams, and they think about security in all of their products. But they're outliers, certainly in the digital world. The automakers, the IoT makers, software as a service, either haven't thought about security at all, if you look at someone like Jeep, or think of security as a bolt-on sort of aftermarket addition to your product. And I would posit that that's absurd, and that's what leads to things like Equifax, right? Equifax happened because the vendor didn't patch, or the Equifax didn't apply the vendor patch. That's crazy, right? Why are we still living in a world where one dumb sysadmin leads to the data breach of every American with credit? That shows us that the way we think about security is simply broken. And I'm doing my best to solve it, but I'm a lawyer, I'm not a security engineer, so my best isn't that good.
Yeah, I echo everything Nate just said. Yeah, I was working in the security industry specifically. Yeah, it's kind of amazing. As he said, the internet was not designed for security in mind. All this stuff is an afterthought, and so I think we're finally at a breaking point. It's been coming over the last 5 years, but we're really at a breaking point right now where the customers and businesses have to wake up. There needs to be legal consequences for what I would call cyber malpractice. We're going to have to get there. We're going to have to go there, unfortunately, because businesses have not done a good job, and so there needs to be consequences for not following through on just basic things that everybody knows you shouldn't do. Very stupid things. So, but as far as the security industry in general, yes, it's a hot business. Our company's doing very well and continuing to do very well because of there is plenty to do. The work never ends. So I think that we are in it for the long haul. I think that obviously things like cloud, which is not just a buzzword anymore, it's reality for the way a lot of businesses are just designed. A lot of your online services, like Instagram and things like that, they all use AWS or whatever as their storage, and that's becoming down, not just the large services, but your mom and pop shops now are starting to depend on cloud services. And so those things have to be secure by default. Those have to be designed to be stupid proof, because the humans will mess up. And I think that's the thing we're learning, is that the humans really need some help. And so, in fact, I don't want to go into a marketing thing here, but that is actually one of the things with ForcePoint. We actually have a new tagline, securing the human point, and that's actually we've kind of made a whole philosophy going forward of trying to help customers analyze human behaviors, not only from like insider threat, data loss prevention, but also just helping to secure things in the enterprise so that they can be more automated, so that they can be secure by default, so that we don't do things that are obvious that we know we shouldn't be doing. But so that's kind of a core design philosophy of kind of stuff we're trying to push forward in the industry. So I think you'll see that more focus on the humans, because we can come up with a lot of great technology and the latest crypto algorithms and the latest quantum resistant crypto and all that stuff. But if somebody leaves the screen door open, people get in, burglars get in, right? So we have to push the technology forward. We have to continue to push all of that and build for the future. But then we also have to take a step back and hire some psychologists and behavioral analysts and people that really do look at the human side of the factors within large companies and within enterprise, and understand how human behaviors can affect. If we make things too hard, people aren't going to use them. Bottom line. So even working in a security company myself, there are things that are just annoying, that I don't want to do. So we have to continue to push the envelope forward on how we can make security easier for everyone, because that's really the only way it's going to get solved. I think, like Nate was saying, is just has to be woven into the fabric of how we're designing new products and services.
If I could add just a tiny bit to that, in my experience, so I work at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. We're all very security minded. We're all relatively tech savvy, and a solution that works to break crypto, to break the encryption on PGP, on what is supposed to be unbreakable encryption. All you have to do is hit reply and say, sorry, on my phone, no crypto, resend, and 80-90% of the time you get plain text using that attack, right? That's not because the crypto is broken. It's because people are broken, right? Yeah. The human is the weak link there, and we need to design systems where if you say sorry on my phone, can't decrypt, resend, the answer is error.
So let me just take those ideas, right? So this is basically what I do, right? So I study the human problem, and we've been trying to out-engineer humans. And we have realized that you can't. I mean, you can do it to an extent, right? But I usually say this. We today have the technology to do a pinpoint precision bomb all the way from here to, fly a plane from here to Bagram Air Force Base and back. But when we do studies and say, how many of you will get into a commercial plane that has no pilot? You're welcome. Because what a pilot does is humans deal with a lot of complexity. I trust humans to land a plane in a Hudson and do something no one else would have thought of doing than AI to do it yet. We aren't there yet, okay? We'll get there. That doesn't mean it's not going to happen, but we're trying to make this leap too quickly. Okay? And understanding people requires us to commit to that process. So I've been working with government, we've been doing this for almost 6-7 years, trying to get, I work with NSA and all these different groups that I told you guys about it. We've been trying our best to say, hey, we got to look at this problem differently. Yeah, sure, the internet was never built for this, but we can't rebuild it right now. We're pretty far ahead in that curve, in that growth curve. So how do we get these two groups to really sit together and say, let's do this together? That's the hard part, right? Because we have two different groups of people here. We have, very engineering-minded people, which is what we need. But the other extreme, we have these other groups of people who don't talk to the other group. So how do we build that? And that's what the challenge is now. That's what the real issue is out there, right? How do we take this human intelligence, the understanding of the user, the understanding of design, and the understanding of security, and make that into a healthy mix? We're not there yet.
Okay, I guess, so my next question is, oh yeah, sure, go.
I guess two of you touched on this a little bit, but there is this fact that we're approaching this era of AI. How does I imagine security becomes significantly more important when we have AI that can do things and make decisions. How is it changing, and how are you starting to see it change?
You guys want to take it? Nope. I spent some time at the MIT Media Lab, where there's a lot of work on AI right now. Up at Harvard, there's a lot of work on AI that we're talking about. Look, we've barely scratched the tip of AI. Okay, we've still not got what's the frontier, right? Technology. So I study human deception, right? I've yet to come up with a technology that can effectively deceive me. That's the threshold, right? The day that happens, we know we're in trouble. Hasn't happened yet. It's happened in text. We've been able to automate enough text-based responses to make you think there's another person at the other end. Let's put it that way. If you want to call that deception, right? Creating an avatar that reflects your expectations. But that next frontier has not yet been achieved. We're still in the computational world. It's still computing and responding. So, as far as the way I look at it, we're not there yet. I think the bigger fear, from a computing standpoint, is quantum computing. I think that's a closer reality, which means all our credential mechanisms, our password security, is out of the window. All our encryption, we got to rethink that whole goddamn thing. And that we've barely been able to do that right the first time around. I think that's a more immediate concern. I think AI is a beautiful buzzword. I don't think it's going to happen soon enough.
Yeah, for me, I'm an industry guy. I'm trying to hit deadlines, next month or whatever, trying to get new versions of the software out. So, AI stuff is a little bit far out for me specifically in the stuff I'm doing on a day-to-day basis. But yeah, I agree that there is a lot of good stuff going on there, and I think that AI can help solve some of these problems that we've been discussing to help with the human behavior side, and so I think there's a lot of great research that could be done that could actually make a big difference. But yeah, I think we're a ways off. I think we're still in nice demo mode, for cute demos in the lab. But but it is coming. I'm not minimizing it. It's definitely coming, and it is gonna transform our society in a big way. So it's definitely something we need to keep looking at. And as we're designing these AI systems, we need to think about the security impact of, when the researchers do train a neural network and they run a bunch of data through it, when it's all said and done and it actually has learned how to recognize what a dog looks like in a picture, we really don't understand how that works. I mean, the neural network, we really don't understand. So there's not a person that's going to sit on the outside of that and say, well, the reason it understands that's a dog is because of this path through the neural pathways in the neural network. I mean, they're going to have some loose approximations on how it's working, but at a basic level, we're not going to understand it. So take that 10 years from now, 20 years from now, where our neural networks get super advanced and are really delving into some of these higher abstract concepts. And then we need to think about the security implications of that and how that's gonna apply into some of these situations, and what that's gonna look like when those AIs are, when the Russian mafia or whoever, Chinese government or whatever, anybody turns those AI networks loose on us or on your personal life or whatever. There's going to be some pretty effective security attacks to be able to happen that way, and we're going to have to do our own research to understand how to combat that. So there's a lot of interesting work there, I think, to be done.
Are you guys familiar with the DARPA Cyber Grand Challenge? Anyone familiar with that? Okay, so DARPA Cyber Grand Challenge started, 2 years ago, year and a half ago? No, 2 years ago, or maybe a little bit more than that at this point. And it's a Defense Advanced Research Project Agency grant tool, essentially, to give money to teams of security developers or AI researchers who can create a neural network that can find and exploit vulnerabilities in a computer system. It's really cool. They've had, so not this last year at DEF CON in Las Vegas, but the year before that, they had a trial where something like 8 or 9 teams competed, and I think almost all of them succeeded on the baseline goals. Super cool stuff. These are systems that hop onto a network and without any involvement whatsoever do essentially capture the flag and are able to exploit a computer network and steal a token or do whatever. DARPA built some security into the challenge. They were running a very abstracted instruction set that doesn't exist in real life. It was a simulated environment. They were using simplified network tools. They weren't running real live daemons. So if one of these AIs got out on the internet, it would not know what to do and it would just stop functioning. And that's great because the potential there is pretty obvious, right? If you train a neural net to scan a foreign system for vulnerabilities, exploit those vulnerabilities, and then use that system to hop to the next, all of a sudden you've got a worm, right? And if it's really good, it could end up doing a lot of damage before you figured out how to stop it. The Morris worm, of course, from the early history of Unix is an example of something like this that had absolutely no intelligence whatsoever. It was just good. So I think we need to, at least for the time being, follow DARPA's lead, and if we're building things that could really harm us, to keep them confined in test environments, keep them confined to artificial instruction sets that don't exist in the real world, etc. Of course, we can probably only manage that for a year or two before that gets boring and we want to see what they do in the real world. But at least for now, let's start thinking about what kind of damage our tools could do if they escaped.
If I could ask a follow-up question on that, because there's been a lot of conversation in the public eye lately about policy surrounding AI and what kind of perhaps overarching legislation could be done to protect or ensure that those types of precautions are made. You know, at EFF, are you guys, do you see the conversation getting closer to actually occurring and having any of these policies be put in place? And are there any other countries that are maybe doing a more forward-looking job on this than we are?
So no. So EFF doesn't advocate for legislation here. We think that Congress moves very, very slowly, and of course technology moves very, very quickly. The federal anti-hacking law was enacted in 1986, and it's still almost in its original form. If we try and regulate AI at this point, I think we're going to do nothing but stifle innovation. That said, we're looking at models like the IRB. So if you want to do research at a university, at a federally funded university that involves human subjects, you have to put your research protocols before a board to make sure that they're ethical. And then only after you get approval can you do research on human subjects. That's not law. You can't go to jail if you violate that. You can't get fined if you violate that. The only thing that happens if you don't put your research proposal to an IRB, Institutional Review Board, is that you don't get funding. I think that's a reasonable place to start with AI, is that even outside the academic context, in private sector, we need to start thinking about doing peer review on experiments that are happening with AI in the real world before they happen. Because the only reason that IRBs work in psychology is because you have your experiment design reviewed before you conduct the experiment on a bunch of undergrads, so that we don't get things like the Stanford Prison Experiment happening again and again. And I think the same thing, right? It doesn't matter. You can do a post-mortem on what happened after your network exploiting AI got out on the internet and took out half of Akamai, but it's too late, right? We need to do those sorts of reviews beforehand, not after the barn door. You don't shut the barn door after the cow's already out, right? You make sure it's bolted before you leave the cow inside for the night.
Just one more point to that. There is a ongoing, I think it's a $60 million grant that Harvard and MIT share on AI governance. So this is in its second year. I'm not involved in that project per se, but you should look it up. There is pretty sizable white papers that are coming out of that. There's some, again, I don't know this well enough, but there's a huge Harvard Law undertaking on it as well, which is looking at legislative impacts, and it's pretty forward looking. So you would find some really interesting pieces over there. So there is an ongoing effort from a AI governance standpoint.
Yeah, I think Estonia's maybe looking at some of that stuff as well.
Right.
And
Well, I think as a nation, they've been probably the most forward-looking when it comes to securing the internet. But yeah.
Awesome. So I guess my then follow-up is that kind of where should the role of government start and end in security? Kind of what are the boundaries that they should cross, or what should they be more involved in? Kind of setting the direction.
So I'm a lawyer, and I'm immediately going to cite a case, NASA versus Nelson. NASA versus Nelson was a case that a NASA scientist had his laptop stolen out of the back of his car. And on that laptop was a Excel spreadsheet, essentially. He did not have full disk encryption. The Excel spreadsheet was just sitting there on his hard drive in plain text. And the Excel spreadsheet had the names, home address, email address, cell phone number, social security number, credit history, employment history, relationship history of every scientist at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena. So far as we know, whoever broke into Nelson's car and stole his laptop, I guess it wasn't Nelson, it was somebody else's car. Whosever car it was and stole that laptop, probably wiped the drive and sold it at a swap meet for $30, and that data, so far as we know, never got out. However, it did go to the courts, and somebody sued NASA for damages under the theory that it was a breach of. So one of the employees of JPL, that was Nelson actually. So Nelson sued NASA, saying, "You guys lost my personal information. You lost my name, my address, my social security number, my employment history, my relationship history, my credit history, everything. You've lost it all, and now it's out there, and I'm harmed by that." And the court, the U.S. Supreme Court, turned around and said, "No, you're not. You are not harmed by all of your personal data getting out." So my proposal is that Congress reverse the Supreme Court in NASA versus Nelson. I would say that we are harmed. So if Nelson had had his identity stolen and had lost a bunch of time and money to try and recover his credit score, maybe he lost his job, maybe he was denied housing because he had his identity stolen, and he could prove that it came from the stolen laptop out of that poor guy's car, then he would have had a case against NASA. And that's just not, no one is going to be able to prove that in the real world. So right now, the state of US law is, if your data is breached, let's say in the OPM hack, let's say in the Equifax hack, you're out of luck. You're completely out of luck unless you can actually prove that you had monetary harm come out of that particular breach. And that's pretty damn hard. So one solution here would, there ought to be a law. There ought to be a law that says if your information is stolen due to negligence or due to recklessness or due to intentional malfeasance by whoever was holding your data, whoever you had entrusted to hold your data, that you have some sort of cause of action against them, right? Because if you can sue someone who loses your personal data, all of a sudden giant financial incentive to keep that data more secure.
Just to understand the story, so was it Nelson's laptop that was stolen, or was it somebody else?
No, it was someone else's laptop.
But wouldn't the fault go back to that person? Because I mean, if you're carrying a laptop that has that kind of information,
I mean, the theory is NASA shouldn't let a laptop like that out the door, right? That's your
Yeah, assuming he should be fired, yeah. For taking a laptop that's not encrypted outside. So that's where we start talking about what I would call cyber malpractice.
that goes back to the fact that
There needs to be some laws.
people problem. The
Right,
fact
yeah,
that you can't do that.
exactly.
Yeah, so you propose that like some sort of legislation should be put through that holds people accountable for breaches, and there was kind of a word in there that I'm curious. You said more or less you said if they're responsible for securing the system, how do you prove that they're doing it well? Like, does that constitute as updating versions of software, or like what is the baseline? So if you in front of a judge and said, hey, this person is obviously being negligent, like, I don't know.
Yeah, it is subjective, but I mean, I guess I'm not advocating, when I say cyber malpractice, I'm not advocating, oops, your stuff got out and we're gonna immediately say you're guilty of cyber malpractice. I mean, there is, like in cases like Equifax and some of these other things, there are things that if you knew all the details of exactly what happened, you'd be like, I can't believe this, that they are this stupid. I mean, like there are well-known security practices that can be followed, and not necessarily wanting the government to issue strict rules on every little thing, but there are some basic things that should be done. Like just a quick example is, I mean, if you're carrying personal identifiable information on a laptop, it needs to be encrypted. So that's one of these things probably everyone in this room can agree on. That's a basic. So there's probably 100 of those of similar type things like that we would all agree on, that you don't put the entire employee database on the internet, with a MySQL database in the clear. I mean, and that kind of stuff happens, So these are the kinds of things we're talking about when I'm talking about cyber malpractice, and people need to get fired, and in some cases need to be held personally responsible.
Right. So the larger point is we're going to legislate against stupidity. But here's the other part of it, right? I mean, there's the whole issue of malpractice. There's liability, but there's also the consumer at the other end, right? what do we get at the end of this? And what do we lose? And how do you ever recover from it? What's the role of government in helping us recover? Right, so I wrote this piece recently when I was talking about, I said, when the people who you turn to whenever your credit is hacked get hacked, when the companies that governments turn to, like Deloitte, when they don't want to get hacked, you have no one to turn to. The lines just ended right there.
Right.
And here, I'm not a legal scholar, but the Europeans have been a little bit more kind of aggressive when it comes to this, maybe more protectionist. Why not? Right? Years ago, I was trying to write this piece, pitch this piece, in the New York Times on the right to be forgotten. Nobody wanted to take it up. But the Europeans, they passed it. They said, but here, all you get is credit monitoring. How good is that? Well, we'll see. Right? So there's these two sides to it, and I think it's a very what's really surprising for all of us, right? And I've seen this in every forum that I'm in, is we've kind of gotten used to losing our information online. And that's the dangerous part. There's a kind of apathy that has come to it. It's like, oh, Yahoo, big deal. Then it's like, oh my God, it's your credit. Not a big deal. I don't know when it becomes not a big deal and you do something about it. I don't know when we get to that point. Right? I mean, it's kind of gotten used to it. It's strange.
To go back to your question, how do we actually evaluate what's malpractice and what's not? I think the malpractice analogy is a good one. In medical malpractice, the way that a court decides whether a doctor has committed malpractice is they get a very respected doctor, an expert in the field, to write a report about the standard of care. And it's not written down in law, right? It's not written down in law that says, for someone this number of kilograms, you use this amount of anesthetic at this schedule or whatever. It's just that you have to, for an anesthesiologist, they have to be up to date in the field, and the way that you check to see if someone is up to date in the field is you call in an expert. You say, did this doctor do up to date in the field work? Did they achieve the standard of care? And the expert says yes, or the expert says no, or in a trial, of course, both sides have experts, and one says yes and one says no, and the court decides who's right. Same thing is totally doable here, right? 15 years ago, however many years ago, someone in South Korea decided it would be a great idea if they legislated that every ATM use the most up-to-date operating system, which at the time was Windows XP embedded. So they wrote that into the law in South Korea. And guess what ATMs in South Korea run today? Windows XP embedded, because that's what the law says, right? So we can't legislate the standards, we can legislate the standard by which the standards are evaluated. So you don't legislate and say you need to be running Windows XP embedded because that's the only secure operating system. You say you have to run an operating system that's widely regarded by experts in the field as secure, or something to that effect, so that the courts are able to keep up, so that the legal system is able to keep up with the technology.
Yeah, for me, one of the frustrations I have is just keeping your phone up to date with latest security patches. I think that's something that just grinds my gears because, well, I used to work at Motorola a long time ago, and they have been lagging behind, and getting their updates out. But anyway, that's another one that I think that we need to push on the telephone industry or cell phone industry, is to be able to really, if they're going to take the responsibility of, I think they really feel like it's just an electronic device like a VCR or a DVD player or something. But this is not. Your cell phone is essentially your digital wallet at this point, And I think the phone companies don't fully embrace that, and they just say, well, we're gonna give you a lot of these cheap phones, they release them, they don't ever update them again. And then there's been so many vulnerabilities that have come out and that need constant updates, And so if you're a year or two behind, then you have a pretty big risk of getting your stuff ripped off from that. So that's another one too. So that's a question.
To that note, you guys mentioned a lot about the European Union being a bit ahead of us. Could you, I don't know how familiar people here are with GDPR. Can you give us sort of, if you guys think that's a step in the right direction, and what perhaps is the scope of it that not everyone is necessarily aware of. Like there's some obvious things, like, you know, most people know about them forcing all the data to be held on, you know, on European servers, but what are the other catches that not so many people know, and are those well thought out or not, in your opinions?
I don't really know too much about it either. I will say, I mean, personal opinion is, yes, the EU is ahead of us on some things, and some of those things I disagree with too. So they in some cases, I believe, are pushing it too far and are inhibiting innovation and restricting, you know, the ability to actually do the right thing in some cases, because they are being more prescriptive in some of their solutions rather than and actually, you know, mandating implementation type stuff that is going to, you know, cause trouble, but then also, you know, really does. I mean, it's hard to say if it's just an anti-American bias, or if there's actually, you know, an actual. It's just a different culture, things like that. I don't know what's driving some of that, but in some cases they are driving a little too far, in my opinion. But there is a lot of good stuff that they have done. I don't know enough about it. Yeah, I don't either.
I'm not an expert on it, but to the extent that I do know about it, there's a few things that are pretty interesting. We got to see how this plays out. The obvious one is the data housing part, but there are other parts to it that are pretty interesting. The first is the breach notification laws are much stronger, and that's something we don't have. We don't have, and there's arguments for and against it, but we don't have a federal breach notification law. Their liability is, from what I understand, the liability goes directly to their person. So it's not only the CEO, but it's the CEO's personal property. Whereas here, when President Obama was trying to pass the federal breach notification law that Congress did not approve, he was trying to minimize liability, saying that if you were a company and your PII was lost and you did tell people, so that was an incentive to let a company like Yahoo, for instance, or Equifax, or OPM for that matter, to disclose a breach so that, you know, you were not afraid of the class action suit that was going to follow. So we don't know how that's going to play out. And I think the third part that I'm aware of is the right to be forgotten, and Google's doing it. So if you're a European citizen, even in the United States, if you're a dual citizen, you can basically petition Google and say, I want this to be removed from showing up in your search algorithm. And Google's essentially created some kind of a process that they haven't told people about yet, but they remove you. Whereas here, I mean, I don't know if any of you have ever committed a crime, God forbid you have not, but if it's online for every job employer out there who's going to search you before you walk into that room. So I think, you know, it remains to be seen how effective it is, but I think it's a step in some direction. Right? I don't know enough about the legal consequences, the long-term ramifications, but it's better than doing nothing, which is what we're doing, right? We have individual states that have mandated their own rules, and I got to tell you, I mean, when you look at this particular Equifax breach and how long it took them to tell us, there's enough room for them to give you enough excuses for that, and everybody's following California law right now.
They had to sell their stock.
That's right, they had to sell their stock, and they're following California law, which is mandating a certain timeline. But then, you know, if you're a lawyer sitting at Equifax right now, a team of lawyers, you're looking at laws from every state and saying, hey, I got 30 days here, I got 15 days there, I got 25 days here, and you're playing that number. And that's a nightmare. I mean, you got to figure it out. I mean, it's hard on both sides, I think. So I mean, that's my understanding of the EU law to the extent I do. Don't quote me.
Is there a difference between like when a medical institution's breached, like I have to get healthcare? Because I know I got like a notification within like 4 or 5 days after they got breached.
I think because it's a healthcare record, it follows a different, the PII rules are different. It's much more better codified.
I'm assuming that's a HIPAA thing.
Yeah, HIPAA is better codified. There are clearer laws on it when it comes to, let's say, Yahoo. So if your secret question is that PII, right? Mother's maiden name, is that PII? I mean, we don't know yet.
Because they got breached, like a year back, and I had all my information still. And then they contacted me, gave me some insurance or something.
Right, and the Equifax is a great learning lesson. Not that we needed one. Within a week, what was it? They created a web page.
I think the billion Yahoo accounts was
Right.
a good learning lesson.
Yeah,
It's
but notice what they did after the breach, right? I mean, this is a $70 million company. right? They create a URL, they host the domain, they send the direct people to it, and it shows up as a phishing email, phishing page. The people are going to it. Then within 2 days, there were 160 other web pages that popped up with basically a play on the same words. And we still don't know what the answer is. Like, what's the right website? I think it's still like, if you're one of those people, one of the 160 million people in the United States, including me probably, all of us, whose social security got hacked or whatever you want to call that, what's the website you go to? I don't know.
So, I've always kind of been curious about this ethical boundary, I suppose, is say you have a hacker that isn't doing anything malicious, but is exploiting government systems, say he's getting in the DOE and looking at input codes, whatever. And he comes forward and honestly discloses these claims and says, hey, I'll fix them. I guess it's confusing to me that these people who are not doing anything malicious are getting prosecuted and charged and thrown in jail for a long time. Do you think that should be adjusted in any way, or do you think there's some policies that could be passed to perhaps protect people who aren't malicious?
Yeah, so welcome to my life. So you just made a very strong argument for the reform of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. I agree with you 100%. So the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act says that any access without authorization or exceeding authorized access to a protected computer, which means anything on the internet, is immediately a misdemeanor, and certainly if it's a government computer, immediately a felony. The US government has taken the position that a GET request on port 80 can be in excess of authorization, and you can go to jail for the rest of your life for that. So of course EFF has stickers that say wget is not a crime. I forgot to bring them. But we have, so yes, we do need to reform that, right? There's no white hat defense for the CFAA. The reason that no one has gone to jail for that specific type of research is that no one is dumb enough to admit doing it, right? If you're a white hat hacker and you find a gaping hole in a DoD system, and you come to me for legal advice and say, what the hell do I do with this? I will tell you the chances of, if you disclose the vulnerability to the Department of Defense, you're going to go to jail. So do the math. Is it worth it to you to spend 15 years in federal prison to get a vuln patched on a DoD site? If it is, go for it.
I wanted to ask Mark, I asked Arun a version of this question earlier today, but from the engineering standpoint, we've talked about a lot of these breaches really coming from users or administrators, folks coming off of the yellow brick road of what the best security practice ought to be. And I'm curious about, as a consultant in the field, what kind of user design methodologies are being implemented to make sure, or to, instead of punishing people who do things wrong, but also kind of keep people on that yellow brick road, so that it just doesn't feel like an afterthought of mix match passwords and stuff like that.
Okay. Well, so like I said, all of our customers are government customers, so I guess I'll answer it from that kind of perspective. So we do have. Say, come on in. We do have we do go through quite extensive review, security design reviews on products, and so I guess I'm not 100% sure exactly what you wanted. So there is a review process for when you're selling software to the government, where they will evaluate mostly the design. So they of course look at implementation, but really, when you're dealing with these security auditors, they're really looking at design level type stuff. The way you're what protocols you're using, and how things are connected together, the plumbing that's involved, and is there a break in the protocol? Are you filtering? Are you sandboxing? How are you containerizing things? And all of the litany of those kinds of things. And that, do you have a secure pipeline of the way the data travels and all this stuff? So there is a whole design philosophy that's applied to try to minimize the vulnerabilities in the system, we always try to do design, defense in depth, I guess is the proper terminology. Where you try to, at every little point in the process, you try to lock the door behind you. So you don't just have one door that lets everybody in. You have 15 doors to get through, and you try to. So it's those kinds of design philosophies that we always try to implement. So.
Okay. I think I was asking.
I don't know if that's answering your question though.
I appreciate hearing the systems engineering type perspective to it.
Okay, sure.
I was thinking of more along the lines of like a UX design kind of thing. So because eventually there's going to be some enlisted airman in a skiff using your system, and how do you make sure that he doesn't sneak a thumb drive in or do some kind of shortcut just because he's ambitious and thinks he's doing the right thing?
Well, I can't talk to details.
Yeah.
But you would make the environment a situation where you couldn't plug in a USB drive. Let's just put it that way. So it's all about design. In other words, you mitigate all these things by just making them move, basically, where they're just not even an opportunity. So that there is no opportunity to even do the kinds of things you're talking about. So for some things that work better than others, obviously. So, but if in the case of this where it's hot gluing the USB port shut, then they'll do that.
Okay.
I actually do have a bit more on that. Kind of with the NASA thing building off what you guys said earlier. Because I worked at a government national labs, and they would search everyone coming in and out of the building, so they could either bring a flash drive or a computer out.
Sure.
They had to step out of the car, just pain in the ass every morning.
And I think we talked about it during my talk, which is, these are kind of environments that are really hard to work in, right? And it gets increasingly hard to do this, right? So when I work in these environments, it's hard, right? I think I talked for the people who were there for my talk. I mean, you're literally stripping down all the technology you have. It's amazing how well work gets done when you're in these rooms because suddenly no one's checking their phones. But the flip side of that is it's not tenable in the long term, right? It's a very small group of people who are willing to do that or who should be asked to do that because increasingly, I mean, it's no longer just the USB drive; it's your watch wall, that comes in. It's your Fitbit, and all these horror stories that I hear about people where they tell me, oh, finally, I work in this national lab. Finally, they're letting us use Fitbits. And then somebody walks in and sees somebody charging their Fitbit on their computer, and they're like, "That's it, all Fitbits out." And these are true stories. The stories I've heard of people who I've worked with, it's just humans. And one of the best stories is one of the NSA guys I worked with. He had an iPhone, which he said, I don't update the OS to put the OS update. And when we asked him why, it was like because his daughter watches Netflix on it. And with the new update, it would be gone. It's a security update, an internal security update, and this is at Sandia National Labs. He said, I don't do it. And he said, look, that's the reality of my life. He doesn't have a babysitter. So when you look at that, you realize, this is hard. This is a hard nut to crack, right? And that's the challenge, though. That's the fun part of the job.
I should go stars.
Yep, it's 8 is another talk, 24/5. But thanks, guys. This is awesome.